What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. What up, Chris?
What's going on, Ethan? How are you, man?
Hey, I don't think I'm better than you living in Miami right now, living up that nightlife, or at least maybe as much as the Cavs were. I don't know.
Better than the Cavs, that's for sure.
Yes, exactly. And Chris, we're talking after the Cavaliers suffered their worst loss of the season, 121-84 against the Miami Heat in Miami. And Chris, this was ugly from the start to the finish. The Cavs weren't able to score more than 25 points in 3 of the 4 quarters and surrendered 28 or more points. It was bad offensively, it was bad defensively. This was not a game that the Cavs will want to remember, but it's against an opponent that the Cavs might potentially see in the postseason. What did you take away from this game?
Not a lot. Ethan, I feel like I say the same thing all the time. I just think for the way that they played, I don't know that you need a detailed autopsy. They were terrible on offense, they were terrible on defense. They made comical turnovers. They had laughable fouls. It just was very uncharacteristic of who this team is and who they have shown themselves to be. If there's any troublesome aspect of tonight's game against Miami, and I don't think there really is, because I just don't think there's going to be something that happened in this game that's going to have a huge carryover into the end of the season or even into a first-round playoff matchup. Like, I don't think we learned a lot about the Cavs or the Heat or what it would be like in a 7-game series between the two teams, but if there's a troubling aspect of it, it's a continuation of the bad basketball that the Cavs have played since the All-Star break. Now, there are reasons for it, of course. There are explanations, easy explanations, but they are far from playing their best basketball. They are far from finding the right rhythm going into the postseason. Maybe that doesn't matter, or maybe it does. That remains to be seen. That, to me, is the only troublesome aspect, is that what we saw against the Heat, in terms of X's and O's, in terms of execution, in terms of attention to detail, it's very much what we have seen throughout the course of the second half of this season. But again, they were without Donovan Mitchell, they were without Max Strus, they were without Dean Wade. Those are 3 of their most important players. It was the first game of a back-to-back. They're all exhausted. I'm exhausted. I think everybody is exhausted based on this schedule. There are certainly some circumstances attached to this game. You don't want them to lose by 37 points. You don't want the Heat to build their biggest margin for a lead in more than a decade. And George Niang said, we don't want to feel this same feeling of getting our butt whooped. We don't want it to be a consistent thing. But oftentimes in the NBA, circumstances are tied to what happens in a game. And I think a lot of them played a part in this embarrassing, lackluster effort that they showed tonight.
Yeah, and it simply was not one that the Cavs are going to want to remember. Obviously, only having one player score in double figures while allowing 7 Miami Heat players to score in double digits on the night is not something you look forward to, especially for a team that's priding itself on defense and then put up just 84 points and allowing 121. It really seemed like this was just another return game, and this time it was Evan Mobley and him getting back and trying to get reacclimated. And even when JB Bickerstaff switched to the entire bench lineup, he had to throw Evan Mobley into the mix a couple of times just to get him some run and get him back into game shape, because obviously, as we've mentioned on multiple times during this podcast throughout the year, the regular season doesn't matter a whole lot for the Cavs, but it matters more so now than it did previously, as they are looking to figure out where their standings lie for the postseason, which obviously is the most important and will determine how this season is looked at by the Cavs, by their organization, and obviously by you guys, the fans. And right now, in the Eastern Conference, the Cavs still sit third, And they kind of are getting some help from other teams' schedule because the Orlando Magic doesn't play until Wednesday of this week. So they get a couple of games to try and figure out what's going on with them. And then the Cavs are actually only half a game ahead of the New York Knicks, who also play on Monday. The Cavs play the Hornets and the Knicks play the Pistons. Both two games that are winnable for the top of the Eastern Conference teams. So, Chris, we've talked about how the Cavs need to take advantage of lower tier teams, and I think that's even more under the microscope right now because if they do lose to the Hornets, that changes the spectrum of the Eastern Conference standings and also potentially puts them into the bracket with the New York Knicks again as their first round matchup. And we've talked an abundance that there's no good matchup basically in the Eastern Conference, but the Knicks are the worst.
Ethan, this is a very tricky situation that the Cavs are in right now. Because you're right, the standings to some degree matter. And where they end up at the end of the season and who they match up with in the first round could be the difference between them making a deep playoff run or them having an early exit for the second year in a row. In saying that, this team needs to give itself the best chance to compete in that 7-game series. And in the current state, they can't compete with anybody. And I'm not just talking about the guys that they're missing. I'm talking about how emotionally, physically, and mentally drained everybody in that locker room is currently. Now, part of that is the fact that it's the end of March, it's the end of a long season, there are 11 games left in the regular season. Guys can see the finish line. It's taken a toll on everybody around the NBA. This schedule has taken a toll on everybody around the NBA. So it's just a natural thing that happens in March in this league. Usually March doesn't have any kind of determination on what a team is going to do when the playoffs roll around. March basketball is messy, it's goofy. You know, you got random guys playing for random teams toward the end of the season for political reasons and whatnot. So I have never been somebody that puts a ton of stock into March basketball because I've been covering the league for more than a decade now, and I understand what it takes to get through a season, and I understand how players are feeling at this point in time. And I just think if it means the Cavs sacrifice a few more wins down the stretch here for them to not completely wear out Darius Garland and Karis LeVert and George Niang and some of these other guys that they've had to really, really lean into, Jared Allen, Isaac Okoro, some of these guys that they've had to really lean into during these stretches to navigate the injuries that have been persistent throughout the course of the year, then I think they have to do that. Because again, you want to be in a good place physically, mentally, and emotionally going into the playoffs. And if Donovan Mitchell continues to miss time, and Max Strus and Dean Wade, same thing, and you start piling up minutes on some of your key players, you have to start asking yourself, in what shape are these guys going to be in when we get to the middle of April? You see signs that this team is going to be in a similar physical state that they were in going into last year's playoffs, where they were just physically exhausted. All of the minutes had caught up to them. All of them trying to overcome injuries caught up to them. And if it's about trying to give yourself the best chance to win a 7-game series, I think JB Bickerstaff has his hands full here when it comes to trying to manage all of this stuff while at the same time balancing the fact that they need to continue to win games for seeding purposes, but they also need to continue to try and avoid these kinds of games against Miami where clearly everything has taken a toll on them. And it's not like the schedule is going to slow down, right? To me, the best way to navigate it is to try and cut down these guys' minutes and maybe give them some opportunities to rest, load management toward the end of the season. As hard as that may be, as weird as that may sound, that may be the Cavs' best shot.
Yeah, so then that turns into the guys that are injured currently and what the best course of action for the Cavs to do with them is. Because obviously, like we've mentioned on multiple occasions, there is no substitute for NBA action. You don't get that in practice. You don't get that in shoot-arounds and stuff like that, in individual games and 5-on-5 pickup games and things like that. So there needs to be a ramp-up period because you don't want guys coming in cold into the first round, and especially not someone like Donovan Mitchell, who the Cavs are going to rely on extremely heavily to lift them past the first round, because that's what they need to do to consider the season a success. And also Dean Wade, whose injury kind of popped up out of nowhere and is now trying to get his way back. And then also Max Strus, who's been out as long, if not longer, than Donovan Mitchell, because obviously Donovan was in and out of the lineup. So I think those guys rest for the remainder of March and up until the last week of April. So when they play the Grizzlies, when they play the Pacers, and when they play the Hornets, because that gives you 3 games among practices and other cardio and conditioning things to allow those guys to not only fully heal, but also to just give the other guys on the roster who are playing now an opportunity to get rest or get some extra minutes, depending on which part of the rotation you're in. Because as we saw in the Miami Heat game, JB Bickerstaff was not afraid to throw the entire bench out because of how the game was going. And I thought that was really telling, because even in the fourth quarter, he threw out Damian Jones and Imani Bates, who didn't play in the third quarter when he had originally threw out most of the guys that were on the bench. So now you're going to have the guys like Pete Nance. You get the guys like Isaiah Mobley's coming up and getting more time and more action if they decide to go that route, which could be helpful for their careers and just getting matchups, especially against this gauntlet of a schedule where they go up against high-level talent. Or, obviously, these other teams who are secure in their spots in their conferences could also be resting their star players, and you get a matchup of rotation players. But that's really here nor there, and we'll have to see what the Cavs do and decide to go with. But, Chris, if you had to put together a starting lineup of the bench team, what would you go with for the Cavs?
What do you mean, in terms of what?
Say they go with the starting unit for the first half of the game, and then you start with the second unit. Are you going Craig Porter Jr. at the 1, Sam Merrill at the 2, Marcus Morris Sr. at the 3, George Niang at the 4, and Tristan Thompson at the 5?
Probably, like if JB gets into a situation, again, where he's trying to save legs, and he doesn't feel like there's a pathway to winning a game, and he's trying to focus on the big picture, then yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the direction that he goes for sure. I don't know that there are going to be too many games like what we saw tonight against Miami, where the Cavs are just not competitive. They don't have it at all, because even in the face of a lot of these injuries that they've dealt with throughout the course of the season, Ethan, they've been competitive. They've battled. They have fought. They have given effort. Tonight was very, very uncharacteristic. And everybody in that locker room admitted that it was uncharacteristic. And everybody in that locker room admitted that they just didn't have it tonight against Miami. Those nights happen. I know fans don't like them, and they shouldn't. And there's no excusing the way that they played tonight against the Heat. There wasn't a lot of fight. There wasn't a lot of effort. They did some really, really silly things. But they're not the first team to get blown out. Miami was coming off a 23-point loss against New Orleans. I mean, Milwaukee lost by almost 30 earlier this year to Toronto, and Toronto sucks. You know, Boston is the best team in the NBA. They lost by 30 plus to the Milwaukee Bucks. So I know people don't like hearing it's the NBA, these things happen. But I'm sorry, it's the NBA. These things happen. All the Cavs have to make sure is that they don't happen continuously. They don't happen consistently. It doesn't happen against Charlotte on Monday, or it doesn't happen against Charlotte on Wednesday. But they're not the first team in the NBA to throw up a complete and utter stinker, and they're not going to be the last team to throw up a complete and utter stinker.
All right, Chris, I think we have said enough about this game, and I think it's time to take a little bit of a break because, as you said, it happens. It's a stinker. We want to move on from it, and so do the Cavs. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to get into the playoff scenarios and what the Cavs potentially could look like in the postseason. But before then, become a Cavs insider and interact with me and Chris by subscribing to Subtext. Chris, could you give the fans a little bit of insight as to what goes down on Subtext?
Sure, I gave some great analysis tonight, Ethan, as the game was going on. Only the way that I could give it. I said, quote, "This is not going well." Hashtag analysis. So you get some of that snark from me, but you also get inside information, behind the scenes stuff of what I see. Following Evan Mobley's workout in Minneapolis on Friday, I gave a detailed account of what I was able to see, and I did not post that on X, formerly Twitter. I gave that to the Cavs insiders on Subtext. I gave them some background on where I believe, based on my sources, Max Strus is at in his recovery. Same thing when it comes to Donovan Mitchell and Dean Wade. So all of that kind of information, and not everything that I know, not everything that I believe, not everything that I see is going to go on X, formerly Twitter, because they don't pay me. It's a free service. And there is stuff that I'm going to put on there, for sure. But there's other stuff that I save for the Cavs insiders on Subtext. And you would be foolish not to sign up and at least give it a try if you are a diehard Cavs fan and you feel like there's more coverage that you want that you're not getting elsewhere. It is happening on Subtext with the Cavs insiders.
And why Chris says you would be foolish to not give it a try is because you can sign up for a 14-day free trial.
Free!
Or visit cleveland.com /Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from Chris and me. We'll be right back. All right, Chris. Both the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference are extremely tight in their races. And the Eastern Conference, you look at all of these teams that are fighting to get better positioning in the Eastern Conference. Obviously, Boston's at 1. Milwaukee is at 2. They're 11 games behind Boston, who is already at 57 wins and only 14 losses on the season. The Milwaukee Bucks are in front of the Cavs by 3 games, who are in the 3rd seed. And the New York Knicks are only half a game behind the Cavaliers, and the Magic are only a game behind the Cavs, with the Indiana Pacers then in 6th seed, only 3 games behind the Cavaliers. It is really close, and even if you want to look a little bit further to the 7th and 8th seed, the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers are only 4 games behind them, and they're currently in the play-in match. So, we talk about the difficulty of the schedule for the Cavs, and we talk about the opportunity for them to potentially let the guys get some more rest, but with the schedule that they have coming up and how close they are to that 7th and 8th seed with the play-in tournament, and we know that they want to avoid the play-in tournament altogether, I want to know how you interpret these next couple of games' importance, especially with the notion that they could potentially just go and rest their guys.
Doesn't mean that they're going to rest them entirely. That's not what I'm suggesting either. And that's not what my opinion is. I think it's try and minimize the workload of each individual guy. And if that means an outright rest for like 1 game at a time, then so be it. If that means just trying to trim back in terms of their minutes, then so be it. If that means just trying to lighten their burden that they're carrying on the offensive end of the floor, then that plays a part in it as well. I just think it's going to be interesting to see what JB does with that moving forward. Ethan, there is no chance. Okay. Somebody taught me a long time ago, never say never. Don't speak in absolutes like that when it comes to the NBA. So let's rephrase. There is next to no chance that the Cavs fall to the play-in tournament, okay? I don't think we have to worry about that based on how Indiana has played in the second half of the season, the inconsistency that Miami has shown, the injuries that the Heat are still dealing with, the 76ers just being completely terrible without Joel Embiid, and no finite return date for Joel in sight. Forget the Bulls, forget the Hawks. So I don't think that there's a strong likelihood of the Cavs falling all the way from 3 down to the play-in. In fact, Basketball Reference has a playoff probabilities report where their results are based on 10,000 simulations of the remainder of the season, including the play-in round. The Cavs have a 99.6% chance of being 1 through 6, a locked in playoff spot. And the most likely outcome for them is either 3 or 4. And I think that's probably about right. We've talked about this on the podcast. I think there is a chance. I don't know how big the chance is, but I do think there is a chance that they fall down to 5, just based on the current state of the Cavs versus the Knicks and the current state of the Cavs versus the Magic and some other factors that tie into that as well. But I still think they're in a good place. I don't think they're in a situation where they have to start chasing wins and making decisions as a team that is chasing wins. Certainly when they have teams on the schedule like Charlotte, like Memphis at the end of the season, they've got to capitalize on those opportunities. They've got to take advantage of those. They've got to get the wins that they should get, because this is one of the reasons why you hope at the end of the season to play against those kinds of teams, because in the NBA, you're bound to go into a funk. And the Cavs right now are in a funk. They've lost 4 of their last 5. They've lost 6 of their last 8. They've lost 3 in a row. But when you play against Charlotte twice in a row, when you've got Utah coming up on the schedule, got Memphis coming up on the schedule, you get some breaks. And those could help you get out of your funk, and at the very least can help you add some more wins to that column and hold off some of the chasers behind you.
So, Chris, I think the next question is, do you think the Cavs finish with a better record than they did last year?
So they've got 43 right now. They finished with 51. I do not think so. I mean, it's going to be close because I do think they're around the 49-50 range. And then one win here, another win that they shouldn't get there. Donovan's going to be coming back. Max is going to be coming back. Dean should be back this week, at least back on the court, testing out his knee and doing on-court activities. So I do think they're going to get close, but I don't believe that they get to 51. I think they fall short of that.
Which is unfortunate because we all remember how hot this team was in the middle of the season. Talking about when they lost Darius Garland and Evan Mobley for multiple weeks.
And they played perhaps the easiest January schedule of any team in the NBA. And perhaps the most favorable based on how the schedule is set up of any team in the NBA.
Obviously, there's things that go into that. But, I mean, the team was playing well. They were able to increase their offensive and defensive rating throughout those 6 weeks and just looked like a better overall team. The joy was there that we've talked about a whole lot, and just the camaraderie was all-time high. And I don't think the camaraderie has gone down at all. I think that obviously the joy is easier to have when you're winning. So that's really the biggest thing for me, is being able to see these guys still enjoy the game, or try to at least, even when things are going sour. Obviously tonight against the Heat, that's simply not possible because of how they got beat. But Chris, is there anything else that you want to touch on for what's going on in the playoff picture, where the Cavs are at, or what could be potentially happening in a couple weeks?
No, I think the only thing that I want to say, Ethan, is that it is our responsibility as beat reporters to contextualize things that are happening, to put things in perspective, and to provide a viewpoint that not everybody gets to have because they're not around the team on a daily basis. They don't see what the team goes through. They don't feel what the team goes through. They don't experience the same things that the team is experiencing. So it doesn't mean that everybody is out here making excuses. We're trying to figure out the how and the why of these things. We're trying to explain what's going on with this team. And you cannot tell the story of this second half of the season and the struggles that have attached themselves to this second half of the season without mentioning what they're missing and the importance of those guys that they're missing. Look, Miami Heat are a different team without Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo. It's like, no duh. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, Miami has won some games shorthanded. Other teams in the NBA have won some games shorthanded. The Cavs have won games undermanned too. But no team can be expected to consistently play at an elite level when they're missing some of their most important players. Miami's 39-32. It's not like they're Boston. They have dealt with a ton of injuries this year, just like the Cavs. And guess what? It has led to inconsistency. The same inconsistency as the Cavs. The Golden State Warriors have dealt with a ton of injuries this year. And guess what? It has led to inconsistency. Yes, sometimes these teams are going to overcome. Yes, sometimes these teams are going to win these games. But to expect the Cavs to play at the consistent level that they showed earlier this season, or when Donovan Mitchell was playing like an MVP candidate, or in January, without Donovan Mitchell, Max Strus, Dean Wade all at the same time, when Evan Mobley was also missing for that same stretch, it's just too much to be missing at once. You're talking about 4 of your top 10, before Mobley came back against Miami, you're talking about 4 of your top 10 rotational pieces. Are you kidding me? What do you think this team is going to do? Are you really asking why they're losing these games? Are you really wondering how they're sucking so bad? Like, come on. These things are oftentimes very easy to explain if you're actually willing to take the time to listen and take the time to dig into what is going on here. So is it surprising that the Cavs are 3-7 in their last 10? No, not given the schedule, not given everything that's missing. But like, March doesn't have to be a precursor for failure in April. Teams are able to get healthy, get into a rhythm, and find a different level. I mean, the Denver Nuggets were terrible in March last year. It didn't stop them. I mean, Miami has been bad in March at times. Doesn't stop them. You know what I mean? Like, the Denver Nuggets last year in March went on a 4-game losing streak to Chicago, San Antonio, Brooklyn, and Toronto. At the end of the season, they lost 3 in a row to Houston, Phoenix, and Utah. Did that stop them from being an elite team? No. Did it stop them from winning the freaking NBA championship? No, it didn't. So all I'm saying is, yeah, it can be frustrating in the moment. And I think it's totally fair to criticize how the Cavs played tonight, how they have been playing since the All-Star break. But all I'm saying is, stop short of making sweeping declarations when a team is at its worst. Because sometimes there are reasons why a team is at its worst. And I think, again, it's fine to criticize in the moment. It's fine to point out things that aren't going well. It's fine to say, hey, this, and this, and this, is it going to carry over to the postseason? Should it be viewed as troublesome? Ask all those questions. Have those concerns. But this isn't the time to judge the Cavs. If you're judging the Cavs and you're projecting what they're going to do in the playoffs based on what you've seen over the last 2-3 weeks, you are being completely, unequivocally unfair.
Yeah, Chris. And what I was going to end on was that this team still has the opportunity for their players that they have out, 3 of their top 10 in their rotation, to come back and play in the postseason. It's not like these guys have season-ending injuries. It's not like these guys don't have the opportunity to come back and kind of ramp up before the postseason. So the Cavs still have the chance to hit their stride at the perfect time. It also depends on matchup, it depends on how they're doing, it depends on if any of these injuries linger. Those are all things that we have to take into account when reporting on this team. And you can't take one without the other. You can't take the injuries and the things that the Cavs have dealt with without also analyzing the inconsistency of this team whenever somebody was out. So I just think that the Cavs do still have a chance to kind of prove the doubters wrong again, but they only have so much time to do it at this point in the season. So, with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Remember to become a Cavs insider by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. We can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast, and the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.